Human history, as we know it, is built on shifting sand. Archaeology constantly uncovers finds that force us to rewrite our entire story. By the end of this journey, you will see 20 discoveries that shattered our most fundamental beliefs about the past. We will see how a temple complex predating agriculture upends the origins of society, and how a mysterious ancient device reveals technology we thought impossible for its time. How much of what you learned about history would you be willing to question? A simple shepherd guiding his flock across a windswept Turkish hilltop could never have guessed he had just stumbled upon the genesis of civilization itself. This place, known as Göbekli Tepe, is not merely an old ruin. It is a profound anomaly, a collection of massive stone circles built by hunter-gatherers over 11,000 years ago. That is a staggering 6,000 years older than Stonehenge. Its T-shaped pillars, some weighing more than 10 tons, are intricately carved with foxes, scorpions, and vultures, a gallery of wild artistry emerging from a world we thought was simple. For decades, the story was clear. First, humans learned to farm. Agriculture created surplus food, which allowed people to settle in villages. Only then, with stability and hierarchy, did they have the time and organization to build temples and develop complex religion. Göbekli Tepe shatters that sequence. Here, the temple came first. This was a cathedral constructed by nomads, a project requiring immense planning, labor, and a shared belief system, all before the first wheat field was ever sown. How did they do it? How did bands of hunter-gatherers, supposedly living hand-to-mouth, coordinate to carve, transport, and erect these colossal stones? The very existence of this site suggests that the human drive to create, to worship, to build something greater than ourselves may be the true engine that sparked settled society. It forces us to consider that perhaps it was the need to gather for ritual at a place like this that inspired people to finally settle down and learn to farm the land around it. This discovery turns our social evolution completely on its head. The cathedral on the hill stands as a silent challenge, proving our ancestors' capabilities were far beyond our imagination, and perfectly setting the stage for another find that redefines ancient ingenuity, this time on the open sea. From the silent, wind-swept hills of Turkey, we plunge into the deep blue of the Mediterranean Sea. In the early 1900s, a group of sponge divers seeking treasure from a Roman shipwreck found something they could not understand. It was a lump of corroded bronze and wood, so unremarkable that it was almost discarded. Only decades later would scientists realize this was not scrap metal. It was the Antikythera Mechanism, an ancient Greek device so complex it has been called the world's first analog computer. Crafted around 100 years before the Common Era, its purpose was to predict the cosmos. Through painstaking analysis, researchers have peered inside this intricate machine. They found a clockwork of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, precisely cut by hand to track the movements of the sun, the moon, and the planets. One dial could even predict solar and lunar eclipses, calculating the timing of events years in advance. This was not a simple calendar. It was a dynamic model of the heavens, a portable planetarium powered by a hand crank. The existence of such an object shatters our timeline of technological progress. We used to think this level of mechanical sophistication did not appear until the great clockworks of the Middle Ages, over 1,000 years later. The Greeks possessed knowledge we never knew they had. So what happened to it? The mechanism suggests a golden age of Greek science and engineering that was ultimately lost, perhaps during the chaotic decline of the Roman Empire. Its secrets sank to the bottom of the sea, and the technology to build such things vanished from history for centuries. This single artifact forces a humbling question. If something this advanced was forgotten for so long, what other marvels of the ancient world have been lost to time, waiting to be found? It is a stark reminder that human knowledge is not a steady climb upward, but a story of peaks and devastating valleys. The loss of such advanced knowledge is a sobering thought, but on the other side of the ancient world, a different kind of ambition was being permanently etched into the earth. In March of 1974, a group of farmers digging a well in China's Shaanxi province struck not water, but the clay shoulder of a life-sized soldier. What they had unearthed was the vanguard of a subterranean army, a discovery that would stun the world. This was the Terracotta Army, a legion of thousands built to guard China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang, in the afterlife. Row upon row of soldiers, each standing over 6 feet tall, were found in perfect battle formation. Archers knelt ready, cavalrymen stood with their horses, and officers commanded with silent authority. The sheer scale was staggering, but the true marvel was in the details. Every single soldier was crafted with unique facial features, a distinct hairstyle, and armor rendered with precise accuracy. No two faces in this vast army are exactly alike. This was not a production line of identical statues. It was a portrait of an entire imperial military, frozen in time for over 2,000 years. The logistical achievement is almost unimaginable. An estimated 8,000 soldiers, 130 chariots, and 670 horses were created by a workforce of hundreds of thousands of artisans and laborers. The project consumed decades, a testament to the absolute power of the first emperor and the incredible organizational capabilities of his nascent dynasty. This find single-handedly revolutionized our understanding of early China. Before its discovery, historians knew Qin Shi Huang as a ruthless unifier who standardized writing and currency. The Terracotta Army revealed the depth of his ambition and the sophistication of his court. It showed a society capable of monumental art, advanced ceramic technology, and a complex belief in an afterlife that required an entire army for protection. What drove a man to command such a project? It speaks to a profound obsession with immortality and control, a desire to rule forever, even in death. The main tomb of the emperor himself remains unexcavated, a final secret guarded by his clay soldiers. As archaeologists continue to uncover new pits and artifacts nearby, one question lingers. If the guardians are this magnificent, what unimaginable treasures still lie with the emperor, waiting in the dark? This profound need to conquer death itself leads us to another discovery, one that reveals a civilization whose sudden disappearance remains one of history's greatest enigmas. A single tossed rock and the sound of breaking pottery echoed through a desert canyon, a sound that would crack open the very foundations of biblical history. The year was 1946, and a young Bedouin shepherd searching for a lost goat had just stumbled upon the Dead Sea Scrolls. Hidden in clay jars within a series of remote caves, these fragile manuscripts had waited in the dry desert air for 2,000 years. They were not just old texts, they were a time capsule containing the earliest known copies of books from the Hebrew Bible, manuscripts that were a full 1,000 years older than any previously known versions. For scholars, this was like finding the original blueprint for a building that had been known only through centuries of renovations. The scrolls confirmed that the core texts of the Bible had been transmitted with remarkable accuracy over a vast span of time, but they also revealed something even more revolutionary, a stunning diversity of belief. Alongside familiar books like Isaiah and Deuteronomy were entirely unknown psalms, detailed commentaries, and strict rules for a mysterious community, likely the Essenes, who had separated themselves from mainstream society. These documents painted a picture of a vibrant and fractured religious world in the centuries before the Common Era, a time when Judaism was not a single, monolithic faith, but a tapestry of competing sects and interpretations. The process of how the Bible was compiled, which books were chosen and which were left out, was suddenly thrown into a new, complex light. How did these scrolls survive so perfectly? The combination of the arid climate, the sealed pottery, and their hidden location in the Qumran caves created a perfect storm of preservation. Yet their survival poses a profound question. What do the subtle differences, the alternate wordings, and the lost books tell us about the evolution of Scripture? They remind us that sacred texts are not frozen in time, but are living documents with a history. Today, using advanced imaging technology like multispectral analysis, researchers are reading lines of text that have been invisible to the naked eye for millennia, continuing to pull new voices from the silence of the desert. This incredible preservation of ancient writing makes you wonder what other lost libraries might be waiting in the world's dry and forgotten places. While the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden in desert caves, an entire city remained lost atop a mountain, veiled by clouds for centuries. High in the Peruvian Andes, the ruins of Machu Picchu perch on a narrow ridge between jagged peaks, a sight so breathtaking it seems to defy both gravity and time. This was not a city discovered by accident through a single lucky find. It was revealed to the world in 1911 by the determined explorer Hiram Bingham, who was led up the treacherous slopes by local Quechua farmers. The Spanish conquistadors who conquered the Inca Empire never found it. For almost 400 years, it existed only in local memory, a ghost city swallowed by the jungle. The moment of its rediscovery forced a complete reassessment of the Incas. This was not a primitive society. It was a civilization of master engineers and architects. The city is a marvel of dry stone construction, a technique where enormous blocks of granite are cut with such incredible precision that they fit together perfectly without any mortar. You cannot even slide a piece of paper between the stones. These walls have withstood centuries of earthquakes that would level modern buildings because the interlocking stones simply shift and then settle back into place. How did they achieve this? The Incas, working without iron tools or the wheel, somehow quarried, shaped, and transported these multi-ton stones up near vertical mountain paths. The logistics are staggering to contemplate. Beyond the walls, the city reveals a genius for living in harmony with a brutal environment. They built more than 600 terraces for agriculture, preventing erosion and creating microclimates to grow crops. An intricate system of canals and fountains brought fresh water from a mountain spring to every part of the settlement, a feat of hydraulic engineering. And the entire city is aligned with the cosmos. Key structures are positioned to capture the sun's rays during the solstices, turning the mountain itself into a giant astronomical calendar. So what was the purpose of this remote and inaccessible citadel? Was it a sacred religious sanctuary, a place to worship the sun god Intai, a royal retreat for the Emperor Pachacuti, hidden away from the common world? Or perhaps a combination of both, a celestial fortress for the elite. The very mystery of its function is part of its power. Machu Picchu stands as ultimate proof that the Inca were not just survivors in the Andes. They were masters of their world, reshaping a mountain into a city with a sophistication that rivaled anything in contemporary Europe. Its silent, empty plazas and perfectly carved stones leave us with a haunting question. If a city this magnificent could remain hidden for so long, what other lost citadels are still out there, waiting for the clouds to part and reveal their secrets? A slab of dark granite pulled from the rubble of a forgotten fort in the Nile Delta, held the silence of an entire civilization within its inscriptions. For centuries, the voices of ancient Egypt had been mute. Its temples and papyri were covered in beautiful, baffling hieroglyphs, a script that had not been read for over 1,400 years. Scholars stared at these intricate pictures of birds, eyes, and scepters, believing them to be nothing more than mysterious symbols, a secret code for priests that would never be broken. Then, in 1799, French soldiers in Napoleon's campaign uncovered the Rosetta Stone. It was not its appearance that was extraordinary, but its content. The same decree was carved in 3 scripts, sacred hieroglyphs for the priests, the everyday Demotic script for the common people, and ancient Greek, which scholars could already read. Suddenly, the code had a crib sheet. The race was on. A young French linguist named Jean-François Champollion became obsessed with the stone. For more than 20 years, he wrestled with the inscriptions, initially trapped by the assumption that every hieroglyph was a symbol for a whole idea. His breakthrough was realizing the system was far more clever. He identified that some of the oval cartouches encircling certain glyphs contained royal names. By matching the name Ptolemy in the Greek text to its hieroglyphic counterpart, he saw that the Egyptians were using their pictures to spell out sounds, just like an alphabet. When he successfully applied this principle to another cartouche, deciphering the name Cleopatra, the dam burst. Hieroglyphs were not just mystical art, they were a complex, functional writing system combining sound signs and meaning signs. In 1822, Champollion ran into his brother's office, shouted, "I've got it," and then collapsed, exhausted from the revelation that would unlock 3,000 years of history. The impact was immediate and profound. The Rosetta Stone was a linguistic time machine. It gave scholars the key to read everything, from the boasts of pharaohs on temple walls to personal letters, medical texts, and religious spells from the Book of the Dead. We no longer had to rely on second-hand accounts from Greek historians. Egypt could finally speak for itself, telling us its own stories of conquest, its beliefs about the afterlife, and the mundane details of daily life along the Nile. This single slab of rock single-handedly created the modern field of Egyptology. It forces us to wonder how many other magnificent cultures are still silent because their language remains a mystery. The Rosetta Stone stands as a permanent monument to a simple, powerful truth, that a single key can open a door to an entire lost world, allowing the whispers of the past to become a clear, resonant voice once more. The same volcanic ash that smothered Pompeii in 79 CE created an almost perfect preservation of an entire Roman city. For nearly 1,700 years, it lay forgotten, a lost world buried under 20 feet of hardened pumice and ash. When systematic excavation began in the 18th century, archaeologists did not just find ruins, they found a city frozen in a single, catastrophic day. This was not history told by emperors or senators. This was the story of everyday Romans, captured with a heartbreaking immediacy that no written text could ever provide. Walk down a street in Pompeii and you see the ruts worn into the stone by cartwheels. Step into a bakery and you find carbonized loaves of bread still sitting in the oven, abandoned in a final, frantic moment. Elaborate frescoes painted on the walls of wealthy villas retain their vibrant colors, depicting myths and family scenes. But perhaps the most profound discoveries were the messages scrawled as graffiti. Political slogans, gladiator announcements, and even simple personal notes like a child's drawing or a declaration of love are etched into the walls, giving voice to the common people, the slaves, and the shopkeepers who built the city's daily life. The most haunting finds, however, are the voids. Excavators noticed strange cavities in the compacted ash. By carefully pouring plaster into these spaces, they revealed the forms of the victims themselves. The plaster casts captured the exact positions of people in their final moments, a family huddled together, a man shielding his face, a dog contorted in agony. These are not statues, they are the shadows of real people, a permanent record of their last breath. This intimate, human-scale view completely transformed our understanding of the Roman world. Before Pompeii, history was largely the domain of the elite, told through official documents and grand architecture. Pompeii revealed the economy, the social hierarchy, and the domestic reality of an entire cross-section of society. It showed us that for all their empire and engineering, they were people just like us with daily routines, simple pleasures, and sudden, terrible fears. Modern archaeologists continue to make stunning finds using ground-penetrating radar and three-dimensional scanning, uncovering untouched villas and new insights into this lost world. The legacy of Pompeii forces a profound question. If we had a similar snapshot of Carthage or Babylon or any other great civilization, how many of our assumptions would shatter? How much richer would our understanding of the human story be? This city, preserved by disaster, gives us a single, perfect frame in the long film of history, a poignant reminder of the fragile, vibrant lives that came before our own. A single landowner's curiosity about the strange mounds on her property would unravel the myth of the Dark Ages. In 1939, as the world teetered on the brink of a modern war, Edith Pretty invited archaeologists to investigate the grassy bumps on her estate at Sutton, in England. What they found underneath one of those mounds was not just an old grave, but the ghost of a king. The soil had long since consumed the wood of a massive ship, 27 meters long, but it had left a perfect, dark impression in the earth, a ship-shaped void holding an unimaginable treasure. This was the burial chamber of an Anglo-Saxon ruler, laid to rest in the heart of his ship, surrounded by the riches he would need for the afterlife. The artifacts they lifted from the soil were of a quality and sophistication that no one believed possible for 7th century Britain. A ceremonial helmet of iron and bronze, reconstructed from hundreds of rusted fragments, revealed a face mask of a warrior with a mustache and striking metal eyebrows inlaid with silver and garnets. There were heavy gold belt buckles intricately woven with interlacing beasts, purse lids shimmering with cloisonné garnets, and a feast of silver bowls from Byzantium and drinking horns. This was not the hoard of a backward chieftain. This was the treasury of a powerful, sophisticated court. The very existence of these objects forced historians to tear up their old textbooks. The era following the Roman withdrawal from Britain was not a dark age of cultural collapse. It was a vibrant period of astonishing artistry and international connection. The Byzantine silver, the Mediterranean bowls, the Scandinavian-style jewelry, all spoke of a kingdom enmeshed in trade networks that stretched across Europe and into the Middle East. Who was the man deemed worthy of such a send-off? The most compelling theory points to King Rewrote, a ruler of East Anglia who held power over other kingdoms and even flirted with Christianity before returning to the old gods. His burial is a political statement in gold and garnet. It shows a society with a complex social hierarchy, master craftsmen, and a worldview that blended pagan traditions with influences from a changing world. The ghost ship at Sutton, who did not just carry a king to the afterlife, it carried us across a threshold of understanding, proving that even in eras we label dark, there was light, brilliance, and a human spirit capable of creating breathtaking beauty. What other royal ships, still hidden beneath the English soil, hold secrets to forgotten kingdoms? The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows across a small hole in the ancient plaster. When Howard Carter peered through that opening in 1922, His patron Lord Carnarvon asked nervously if he could see anything. Carter's breathless reply has echoed through history, yes, wonderful things. He was the first person in over 3,000 years to lay eyes on the antechamber of Tutankhamun's tomb. This was not another plundered crypt. It was a time capsule, sealed and forgotten, preserving the most complete pharaonic burial ever found. The sheer density of objects was overwhelming. Over 5,000 artifacts were crammed into 4 small rooms, a chaotic jumble of golden chariots, disassembled beds, alabaster vases, and chests of lavish clothing. For a pharaoh who ruled for only about 10 years and died young, the opulence was staggering. His iconic gold death mask, with its lapis lazuli and quartz inlays, has become the eternal face of ancient Egypt. But beyond the mask were the intimate details of a life, both royal and human. There were child-sized chairs, a writing palette he used as a boy, and dozens of boomerangs for hunting birds. This was not just a tomb for a god-king, it was the resting place of a person. The discovery provided a tangible inventory of New Kingdom wealth and artistry that historians could only guess at from the empty, ransacked tombs of greater pharaohs. Every object, from the grandest throne to the simplest loaf of bread, spoke to a civilization at the peak of its power and sophistication. The tomb also held crucial clues to a turbulent period. Tutankhamun was the son of the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, who had abandoned Egypt's traditional pantheon to worship a single sun god. The artifacts in Tutankhamun's tomb show a careful, deliberate return to the old ways. The gods Akhenaten had banned were restored to their places on the boy king's possessions, a clear political and religious statement. His burial was part of a national project to erase his father's revolution and return stability to Egypt. This single, intact context gave scholars the evidence they needed to understand this pivotal restoration in a way no damaged tomb ever could. The global frenzy that followed the discovery, the curse of the pharaohs in the newspapers, the sheer wonder of it all, revived popular passion for Egyptology for a generation. Yet the most haunting question remains: if this was the burial of a minor, young ruler, what unimaginable treasures must have filled the tombs of legends like Ramses the Great or the powerful Queen Hatshepsut? Their tombs were looted in antiquity, their splendors lost forever. Tutankhamun's crowded chambers offer just a fleeting glimpse of the riches that were, a whisper of the glory that has vanished, making us wonder what other sealed doors might still wait in the heat of the valley, holding kings whose stories are still untold. While the pharaohs built for eternity, a different kind of experiment in living was unfolding on the dusty plains of central Turkey. Çatalhöyük is a 9,000-year-old settlement so vast and so strange it has been called the world's first city, yet it defies every rule we have about what a city should be. Imagine a honeycomb made of mud brick, a single, massive structure with no streets, no alleyways, and no grand public squares. Its houses were built directly against one another, their walls shared, creating a continuous, solid block of homes. To enter your own house, you would climb a ladder to the roof and then descend through a hole into the single room below. Life here was lived literally on top of your neighbors. The entire community was a single, interconnected entity. This radical architecture points to a society without the things we consider essential for urban life. There are no palaces for a ruling class, no grand temples for a powerful priesthood, no fortifications for an army. The homes are all roughly the same size, and the burials show no significant differences in wealth. For a place that may have housed up to 8,000 people, this apparent equality is staggering. How could such a large community function for over 1,000 years without kings, without administrators, without the social hierarchy we assumed was necessary to keep order? The answer seems to lie within the homes themselves. Beneath the plaster floors, families buried their dead. The bones of ancestors were literally the foundation of the living space, suggesting a deep, domestic form of ancestor worship. The walls were not blank. They were a vibrant canvas painted with scenes of hunting and wild aurochs, and adorned with plaster reliefs of leopards and female figures. This was not art for a public audience. It was a private, symbolic world centered on the family and the home. The social glue of Çatalhöyük was not a top-down authority, but a web of shared beliefs, kinship ties, and ritual practices that played out in every single household. This discovery forces a profound rethink of the very nature of civilization. We have long told a story that cities require leaders, that large-scale society inevitably leads to social stratification. Çatalhöyük stands as a powerful counter-argument. It proves that for a millennium, humanity successfully built a massive, complex, and stable community on a foundation that appears remarkably egalitarian. It was an alternative path, one that did not lead to pyramids or empires, but to a vibrant collective life. Modern excavations continue to analyze the microscopic residues on tools and the chemistry of the bones, revealing the intimate details of their diet, their trade, and their daily routines. Each new finding deepens the mystery of how they made it work. What if our entire model of civilization's ascent is just one version of the story, and the silent, sprawling mound of Çatalhöyük holds the blueprint for another way, a path not taken, but one that proves our ancestors were capable of social complexity without the heavy hand of a king? The soil of a quiet French field in Lavau surrendered a secret in 2015, a burial that would shatter the long-held image of the Celts as isolated tribes on the fringes of the civilized world. Inside a burial chamber, archaeologists uncovered the skeleton of a man they called the Lavau Prince, laid to rest in the 5th century before the Common Era. He was adorned not with simple tribal tokens, but with spectacular wealth that spoke of connections spanning the continent. A heavy gold torque, a neck ring of immense power and status, encircled his neck, its craftsmanship flawless. But the true astonishment lay in the objects surrounding him, a collection that was not Celtic at all. There was an ornate Greek wine jug, a finely wrought Etruscan bronze vessel, and most stunning of all, a massive bronze cauldron. This cauldron was not a simple pot. It was a masterpiece of metalwork, its handles decorated with the fierce, bearded face of Aeolus, the Greek god of rivers, his horns curling with divine power. Here was a Celtic chieftain buried in the heart of France, with artifacts that could have graced a banquet in Athens or an Etruscan palace. This single tomb was a smoking gun, undeniable proof that centuries before the Roman conquest, Celtic elites were not primitive barbarians. They were active, sophisticated participants in a vast pan-European network of luxury trade and cultural exchange. They were drinking Greek wine from fine vessels, displaying their power through objects that connected them to the prestigious Mediterranean world. The quality of the local goldwork, equal to anything being made in the south, proved their own artisans were masters, not pupils. This discovery forces a complete rewrite of the Iron Age. It was not a time of isolated cultures, but of an ancient globalization, where ideas, art, and status symbols flowed along trade routes that connected the Scottish Highlands to the shores of the Black Sea. The Lavau Prince was not an outlier. He was a node in this vast web, and his tomb begs a tantalizing question. If one chieftain in one field possessed such treasures, what other Celtic rulers lay in unopened mounds, their graves filled with evidence of a connected continent we are only beginning to map? As researchers use advanced imaging to study residues inside these vessels, tracing the wine and oils they once held, the story of this interconnected world grows richer, proving that the boundaries between ancient civilizations were far more porous than our history books ever admitted. A single, disputed line on a piece of parchment could redraw the entire map of history. The Vinland map emerged in the 1950s, a seemingly medieval document that sent shockwaves through the academic world. It depicts the known world of Europe, Asia, and Africa, but then it shows something more, a large island in the Western Atlantic labeled in Latin as Vinland. According to the text on the map, this land was visited by Europeans in the company of Leif Erikson around the year 1000. If this map was truly drawn in the 1400s, it would mean that a European cartographer knew about North America decades before Christopher Columbus ever set sail. The implications are staggering. It would suggest that the knowledge of these Norse voyages was not lost, but was quietly preserved and copied in monastic libraries, a secret thread of geographic understanding running through the late Middle Ages. The initial excitement, however, soon gave way to a bitter and enduring controversy. Scientists analyzing the map's ink found traces of a modern titanium compound, suggesting a 20th century forgery. Yet other analyses of the parchment itself confirmed its age to the correct period, creating a maddening puzzle. Was it a modern fake painted on genuinely old parchment? Or could the anomalous ink be explained by contamination or a rare medieval recipe? This single artifact has become a battleground, not just over its own authenticity, but over the very methods we use to verify history itself. It forces us to ask, how do we prove the truth of something that would fundamentally rewrite our past? Yet, even as scholars debate the map, we know the underlying story is true. Far from the quiet libraries of Europe, on the windswept coast of Newfoundland, lies the answer. The archaeological site of El Ants Aux Meadows, discovered in 1960, provides the undeniable physical proof. Here, the foundations of Norse longhouses, a forge for smithing iron, and artifacts like a bronze cloak pin confirm that Vikings led by Leif Erikson did indeed build a small settlement in North America around the year 1000. They were here 500 years before Columbus, so why did their discovery not change the world? The Norse presence was fleeting, a stepping stone for gathering timber and perhaps exploring further south. They encountered indigenous peoples they called Skraelings, and relations likely ranged from trade to conflict. The settlement was abandoned within a decade, and the route back to Vinland became a story told in sagas, rather than a highway for colonization. The Vinland map, whether real or fake, encapsulates this profound historical irony. The Norse reached the New World first, but their knowledge remained a footnote, a possibility that flickered and then faded. This forces a haunting counterfactual. What if this knowledge had spread? What if medieval Europe had possessed a map that showed a vast land across the sea? The age of exploration might have begun centuries earlier, with consequences we can only imagine. The controversy reminds us that history is not just about what happened, but about what was remembered, what was written down, and what was believed. A single line on a map, real or forged, holds the ghost of a path not taken, a world that could have been. A spider with legs stretching nearly 150 feet across the desert floor. A hummingbird with wings spread in eternal flight. These are the Nazca lines, a gallery of giants etched into the sun-baked pampas of southern Peru, created by removing the dark, oxidized surface stones to reveal the pale earth beneath. These geoglyphs are not just art. They are a monumental question mark left by a people who flourished 2,000 years ago. To stand beside one is to see only a trench of displaced gravel. Their true form, a perfect representation of a monkey or a whale, reveals itself only from hundreds of feet in the air. This single fact launched 1,000 theories, from ancient astronaut fantasies to claims of lost hot air balloon technology. The truth, however, is far more impressive. The Nazca people achieved this precision through simple, brilliant engineering. They used a system of scaling up small models. A master designer could plot a complex figure on a small grid, and teams of workers could then replicate that grid on a massive scale using stakes and ropes, transferring the design one square at a time onto the desert canvas. They did not need to see their work from above. They only needed to follow the plan from one point to the next, trusting the geometry. The result is a testament to their collective effort and their profound understanding of mathematics and surveying. This was not the work of a primitive culture. It was a society capable of organizing large labor forces for projects that served no immediate, obvious purpose for survival. But what was that purpose in one of the driest places on Earth, where rain might fall only once a decade? The answer may lie with the very Earth they mark. Many of the lines run perfectly straight for miles, converging on distant hills where aquifers would have been located. The animal figures, like the hummingbird and the spider, are also linked to water in local folklore, seen as bringers of rain or fertility. Some researchers believe these lines were ritual pathways, walked by priests during ceremonies to call upon the deities who controlled the precious water. The desert itself was their temple, and the geoglyphs were their prayers made permanently visible, a desperate, beautiful plea to the heavens for life-giving water. Modern technology is now revealing just how vast this prayer really is. Drones and satellite imagery are discovering new lines and figures every year, some hidden on hillsides, others faded to near invisibility. Each new discovery proves the Nazca landscape is a far more complex and interconnected composition than we ever imagined. This sprawling, ancient art forces us to reconsider the human impulse to leave a mark, to communicate with the gods, or perhaps with the future. If a civilization could transform an entire desert into a sacred diagram, what other immense creations have we missed, hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right perspective to be seen? They stand with their backs to the sea, giant stone faces gazing eternally inward across a remote, windswept island. When Dutch explorers first landed on Easter Island on a Sunday in 1722, they were met by a sight that defied all logic: hundreds of colossal statues, or moai, carved from volcanic rock. Some stood over 30 feet tall and weighed more than 80 tons, yet they were created by a small Polynesian society that had been completely isolated from the rest of humanity for nearly a millennium. How could a few thousand people with no metal tools, no wheels, and no large animals achieve such a monumental feat? The answer lies in an astonishing communal effort. The moai were quarried from the soft rock of the Rewrote volcano, where master carvers used hand-held basalt picks to chip away at the living stone. But the true mystery is not the carving, it is the transportation. How did they move these multi-ton giants for miles across rough, hilly terrain? The island's oral traditions spoke of the statues walking, a poetic clue that modern experiments have brought to life. Researchers have shown that by using ropes to rock a moai from side to side, teams of people could, in a sense, make the statue walk itself forward in a slow, controlled wobble. This method, combined with log rollers and meticulously prepared roads, turned an impossible task into a coordinated, generational project. For centuries, the most famous image of these statues was of heads protruding from the ground. But recent excavations have revealed a stunning secret. The moai are not just heads, they are complete figures with full torsos, arms, and hands carved in delicate relief, their bodies buried up to the neck by centuries of soil and erosion. Many were also crowned with massive, cylindrical topknots of red scoria stone, each weighing as much as 10 tons, hauled from a separate quarry to perch precariously on the statues' heads. This was not a simple ancestor cult. It was an entire society's spiritual and political energy made manifest in stone. The moai represented powerful lineage chiefs, their presence believed to channel supernatural power or mana to protect the community. But this very act of creation may have sown the seeds of collapse. The island was once covered in a lush palm forest, but the constant demand for wood for rollers, ropes, and to transport the topknots likely led to catastrophic deforestation. Without trees, the soil eroded, crops failed, and the society that had built these giants fractured. The moai were toppled in inter-clan warfare, and the culture turned to a new, desperate religion centered on the birdman competition. The story of Rapa Nui is a haunting parable of what happens when a society's ambition outstrips its environment. Yet, even in its decline, the civilization left one last tantalizing mystery: wooden tablets covered in a unique script called Rongo-Rongo. To this day, no one has been able to decipher it. The language of this isolated people remains locked away, a final, silent testament to a culture of profound achievement and tragic consequence. Its silent glyphs make us wonder what other stories of human ingenuity and fragility are waiting on the world's most remote islands, stories we have not yet learned to hear. A simple clay jar, no larger than a hand, sits quietly in a museum case. Inside, an iron rod is suspended within a copper cylinder, sealed with an asphalt stopper. Found in the 1930s near Baghdad, this unassuming object has ignited one of archaeology's most enduring controversies. Dubbed the Baghdad Battery, it dates from the Parthian or Sasanian era, a period spanning from 250 years before the Common Era to 650 years after. To the untrained eye, it is merely a curious vase, but to some researchers, its construction is a deliberate design for generating electricity. The principle is basic electrochemistry. If the jar were filled with an acidic liquid, something as common as vinegar or grape wine, the two different metals would interact with the electrolyte, creating a small but measurable electrical charge. Experiments with replicas have confirmed it works, producing around 1 to 2 volts, enough for a faint tingle or a very low power application. So what could an ancient civilization have possibly done with such a tiny current? The most compelling theories are surprisingly practical. One suggests it could have been used for electroplating, the process of depositing a thin layer of one metal onto another. A small voltage is all that is needed to gild a silver object with a shimmer of gold, a trick that would have seemed like magic. Another possibility is its use in medicine. Ancient Greek and Roman texts describe the use of electric fish to numb pain, so the concept of using a mild shock for therapeutic purposes was not unknown. If this was indeed a battery, it forces a staggering reconsideration of ancient Middle Eastern technology. It implies a working knowledge of electrical principles centuries, even a millennium, before scientists like Volta and Galvani would officially rediscover them in the West. So why is the mainstream archaeological community so deeply skeptical? The core of the problem is a profound lack of context. No written records were found with the jars describing their function. No wires or associated electrical devices have ever been unearthed. Without this corroborating evidence, the battery theory remains just that, a compelling but unproven hypothesis. Critics offer alternative explanations, suggesting the jars were simply secure containers for holding sacred scrolls, with the iron and copper acting as protective, inert materials. This debate gets to the very heart of how we interpret the past. How do we prove the purpose of an object when its creators left no manual? The Baghdad Battery stands as a perfect symbol of this challenge. It is a ghost of a possibility, a whisper of a technology that might have been. It forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Human knowledge is not a linear, guaranteed ascent. It is a story of fits and starts, of brilliant ideas that flicker into existence only to be snuffed out by war, social collapse, or simply a failure to pass the secret to the next generation. If something this revolutionary could be invented, used, and then forgotten, what other fragments of genius lie buried in the dust, waiting for us to recognize them for what they are? A young girl's voice echoed through the darkness, exclaiming that she saw bulls. Her father, Marcelino Sanz de Sottuola, lowered his lamp to see what his daughter Maria had discovered on the low cave ceiling. There, shimmering in the firelight, were not crude scratches, but a vibrant herd of bison, painted in rich reds and blacks, their bodies bulging with a startling realism. The year was 1879, and this was the cave of Altamira. When Sottuola presented his findings, he was met not with acclaim, but with scorn. The leading prehistorians of the day declared the paintings an obvious hoax. How could cavemen, brutish and focused only on survival, produce art of such sophistication and power? The very idea was an affront to the established order of human evolution. The experts were so imprisoned by their own preconceptions that they rejected the evidence before their own eyes. It would take 20 years and the discovery of similar French caves before the scientific establishment finally, reluctantly, admitted its profound error. The art of Altamira was genuine, and it was ancient, dating back approximately 36,000 years. This was not mere decoration. The artists used the natural contours and bulges of the rock to give their subjects a breathtaking three-dimensional volume, a technique that makes the animals appear to breathe and move in the flickering light. They mixed pigments to create depth and shadow, demonstrating a mastery of color and form that rivals any modern gallery. The discovery was a cognitive revolution. It proved that the human mind, even in the deepest ice age, was not a simple tool for survival. It was capable of complex symbolic thought, of observing the natural world with a profound aesthetic sense, and of feeling a deep spiritual need to represent that world in a sacred space. These were not brutes, they were storytellers, philosophers, and artists. The controversy over Altamira serves as a permanent lesson in how easily dogma can blind us to truth. How many other caves, sealed for millennia, hold similar galleries of Ice Age genius, waiting for another curious child to find them? This artistic revelation forces us to ask what other dimensions of prehistoric life we have entirely underestimated, a question that finds a startling answer not in art, but in the silent, frozen remains of a long-lost human relative. The silent, painted caves of our ancestors speak of a deep and ancient mind, but the sea holds its own kind of silence, swallowing entire cities into legend. For centuries, the Egyptian port of Thonis-Heracleion was just that, a name in faded Greek and Egyptian texts, a place scholars thought was a myth. Then, in the year 2000, underwater archaeologist Frank Gaudio and his team began to map the murky seabed of Abu Qir Bay. Their sonar did not just find scattered ruins, it revealed the ghostly outline of a lost metropolis, completely submerged under the Mediterranean for over a millennium. They had found Thonis-Heracleion. Diving down into the quiet, dark water was like stepping into a frozen moment. 16-foot-tall statues of pharaohs and queens, carved from red granite, stood upright on the seafloor, their stern gazes now meeting only schools of fish. A massive stone stela covered in perfectly preserved hieroglyphs proclaimed the royal decrees of Pharaoh Nectanebo I, its message untouched by time. The scale of the discovery was staggering, a bustling port city that served as the main gateway between Egypt and the Greek world. This was where trade goods from across the Mediterranean were unloaded, and where Greek merchants had to pay taxes and duties before being allowed to sail up the Nile. The city's catastrophic disappearance around the 8th century likely came from a devastating earthquake. The shock waves would have liquefied the region's soft clay soil, causing the entire city to simply sink into the water, swallowing temples, houses, and harbors in a single dramatic event. This disaster, however, created a time capsule of unparalleled preservation. On dry land, wood and papyrus rot away to nothing. Here, under layers of protective sediment and saltwater, archaeologists found the skeletons of actual ships, their wooden hulls and ribs still intact. They recovered delicate gold coins, intricate jewelry, and ritual objects used in the worship of the god Amun-Jereb, whose main temple stood here. These organic finds give us a texture of daily life that stone alone can never provide. Every season of diving brings new wonders to the surface, rewriting our understanding of Greco-Egyptian relations. We now see this was not two separate civilizations looking at each other from a distance. It was a vibrant, interconnected world of cultural exchange, centered on a harbor city that was the New York or Shanghai of its day. The ongoing excavation of Thonis-Heracleion forces a profound question. If an entire city of this importance could vanish beneath the waves and be forgotten for 1,000 years, how many other legendary ports and trading hubs lie hidden just off our coastlines, their stories waiting in the silent, shifting sand? A tiny sliver of bone, no bigger than a pebble, was found deep within the frozen silence of a Siberian cave. It seemed insignificant, the kind of fragment archaeologists might carefully catalog and then store away. But this single finger bone, discovered in 2008 in a cave named Denisova, held a secret locked so tightly inside that only the most advanced genetic science could pry it open. When researchers sequenced its DNA, they expected to find a Neanderthal or an early modern human. Instead, they found something entirely new, a previously unknown human species we now call the Denisovans. In that moment, the simple story of human evolution, with its neat, linear progression, shattered forever. Here was proof that our world was once a crowded stage, shared by multiple kinds of humans. The Denisovans were a distinct branch, cousins to the Neanderthals, who had thrived in Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. They were not just shadows in the fossil record. They interbred with both Neanderthals and with the ancestors of modern humans who migrated out of Africa. This single genetic revelation tore up the old human family tree and forced us to plant an entirely new, wildly branching one. Subsequent finds in the cave, a heavy molar tooth and a few other bone fragments, have slowly given this ghost species a form. The tooth was remarkably large, even bigger than a Neanderthal's, suggesting a robust and powerful people. We now know they had sophisticated tools, wore jewelry made of animal teeth and bone, and hunted the mammoths and woolly rhinos of the steppe. But their most enduring legacy is not in their tools or their bones. It is inside us. Genetic studies reveal that modern populations in Melanesia and Southeast Asia retain a significant amount of Denisovan DNA, up to 5% in some groups. This is not ancient, meaningless code. This genetic inheritance likely helped these populations adapt to new environments, perhaps conferring advantages in disease resistance or coping with high altitude. The Denisovans are gone, but a part of them lives on, woven into the very fabric of humanity. This discovery forces a staggering question. If a single cave holding just a few fragments could reveal an entire lost chapter of the human story, what other unknown ancestors are waiting in the darkness? How many other branches of our family tree have vanished without a trace, their stories waiting to be read not from grand skeletons, but from the tiniest scraps of bone and the invisible code they contain? The story of the Denisovans is a testament to a new kind of archaeology, one where a speck of dust can hold a universe of history, and where our understanding of what it means to be human is forever expanding. The dust of Nineveh yielded not just broken bricks, but the very thoughts of a forgotten empire. In the 1850s, while excavating the palace of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, archaeologists uncovered a collection that dwarfed all expectations, a library of over 30,000 clay tablets. This was not a haphazard pile of records. It was the world's oldest known systematically organized library, a treasury of knowledge meticulously catalogued and shelved in a royal palace from the 7th century before the Common Era. The sheer scope of subjects was breathtaking. Tablets covered advanced mathematics, with calculations for area and complex interest rates. There were detailed astronomical observations tracking the movements of planets and stars, medical texts listing diagnoses and herbal remedies, and legal codes that laid out the laws of the land. But the true crown jewel was a literary masterpiece the modern world never knew existed, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This sprawling tale of a legendary king's quest for immortality was a stunning work of philosophy and adventure. Most astonishingly, it contained a detailed story of a great flood sent by gods to punish humanity, with a man named Utnapishtim building a boat to save his family and the animals. This narrative was written centuries before the biblical story of Noah found its form, forcing a profound re-evaluation of the origins of one of the world's most famous stories. The library was a complete intellectual universe. One could find administrative receipts for bundles of reeds, recipes for perfumes, and handbooks for priests interpreting the omens in a sheep's liver. It provided an unparalleled window into every facet of Assyrian life, from the king's throne room to the merchant's stall. This discovery single-handedly transformed the Assyrians from one-dimensional conquerors, known only from the boastful carvings on their walls, into a complex civilization of scholars, scientists, and poets. King Ashurbanipal himself was a scholar king who took pride in his literacy and ordered his agents to travel the empire collecting every important text they could find. His ambition was to gather all the world's knowledge in one place. The tragic irony is that his great library survived only because of the very event that destroyed it. When Nineveh fell to its enemies in 612 BCE, the palace burned. The intense fire baked the clay tablets, making them as durable as pottery and preserving them for 2,600 years in the rubble. If they had been written on perishable papyrus or parchment, like the libraries of Alexandria, they would have been lost to ash and decay. This ancient collection forces us to appreciate the incredible fragility of knowledge. How many other great libraries filled with poems, scientific theories, and histories have vanished without a trace because they were written on perishable materials? The Library of Ashurbanipal stands as a permanent monument to one civilization's drive to know everything, and a haunting reminder of how much has been permanently silenced by the fires of time. A farmer's search for a lost hammer in a Suffolk field uncovered not a simple tool, but the gleam of ancient silver. Eric Laws was using his metal detector in 1992, hoping to find the missing hammer, when the device screamed with a signal so strong it hinted at something far larger. What he and archaeologists soon unearthed was the Hoxne hoard, the largest and finest collection of late Roman gold and silver ever discovered in Britain. Buried carefully inside a wooden chest, itself protected within a larger box, were more than 15,000 gold and silver coins, dozens of exquisite pieces of silver tableware, and stunning gold jewelry, all dating from the very end of Roman rule around 407 CE. This was not a random stash of valuables hastily hidden. The chest's contents were meticulously organized, with smaller ivory and wooden boxes inside holding delicate necklaces and rings, their compartments carefully arranged as if for a long journey. One of the most personal items was a beautiful body chain, a delicate gold harness meant to be worn draped across a woman's torso, a piece of intimate adornment that speaks of a specific person, not just anonymous wealth. This careful packing tells a deeply human story. This was not official state treasure, but the private fortune of a wealthy family, people who believed they would one day return to retrieve their most precious belongings. The fact that they never did is one of history's most poignant silences. Their failure to return paints a stark picture of the sheer chaos and sudden danger that accompanied the final collapse of Roman authority in Britain. Imperial administration was crumbling, legions were being withdrawn to the continent, and waves of Saxon raids and migrations were beginning. The family that buried this hoard likely fled for their lives, expecting a temporary disruption, only to be swallowed by the violent turmoil of the era, never to see their treasure again. This single buried chest shatters the old idea that Roman Britain ended with a whimper, a slow decline into poverty. The Hoxne hoard is dazzling, tangible proof that immense private wealth and a refined Roman lifestyle persisted right up to the very edge of collapse. The craftsmanship is breathtaking. Silver pepper pots shaped into a delicate, lifelike ibis and a stately portrait of a noblewoman, her face capturing a serene elegance, reveal a level of artistry and luxury we rarely associate with a distant frontier province. Gold bracelets and rings, heavy and intricately decorated, show off a taste for opulence that rivaled anything in Rome itself. Because these pieces were hidden away and never melted down or reused, they survive in almost pristine condition, giving us an unparalleled look at the aesthetics and technical skill of late Roman metalworkers. The Hoxne hoard does more than fill museum cases. It forces us to confront the human reality behind a historical transition. It is a frozen moment of hope and then loss, a family's desperate attempt to preserve their world in a wooden box. That this treasure waited for 1,600 years for a farmer to find a hammer reminds us that the ground beneath our feet is not just soil. It is an archive holding the secrets of lives interrupted, each one a story waiting to challenge everything we think we know about the past. These 20 discoveries are not isolated events. They form a pattern, a blueprint for how history is rewritten. Time and again, it is tangible, physical evidence that shatters the written record. A statue rising from the sea that proves a city was real. A device pulled from a shipwreck that reveals technology we never knew existed. The historical narrative we inherit is often written by the victors, focusing on grand empires and powerful kings. Archaeology gives a voice to the silent majority, to the hunter-gatherers at Göbekli Tepe, the everyday citizens of Pompeii, and the egalitarian society of Çatalhöyük. It fills the profound gaps in our story with objects that speak louder than any chronicle. And where do we find these revolutionary objects? Rarely in the centers of power we already know. They emerge from the forgotten margins, from underwater cities like Thonis-Heracleion, from remote caves like Denisovan, and from fields like Sutton, places once considered peripheral to the main events of history. This is where the old stories were preserved precisely because they were overlooked, untouched by the recycling of materials and the destruction of war that consumed the great capitals. The pace of these revelations is accelerating, not because we are digging faster, but because we are seeing more clearly. Scientific technologies act as a new kind of lens. DNA analysis can extract a whole human species from a sliver of bone. Satellite imagery can spot a buried city from space. Chemical analysis of residues in a clay pot can tell us what a family ate for dinner 3,000 years ago. We are no longer just reading the labels on the jars of history, we are tasting what was inside them. This collective evidence paints a picture of human history that is far richer and more complex than a simple upward climb. It is a story of brilliant peaks and devastating valleys, of interconnected cultures like the Lavau princes' Celtic Europe, and of knowledge lost for millennia, like that embedded in the Antikythera Mechanism. Our past is not a straight line, but a sprawling, branching network of experiments in how to live. So what allowed these specific clues to survive the relentless erosion of time? In almost every case, it was a perfect storm of preservation. A sudden cataclysm, like the volcanic ash at Pompeii, freezes a moment. An arid climate, like that surrounding the Dead Sea Scrolls, prevents decay. A waterlogged, oxygen-free environment, like the seabed holding Thonis-Heracleion, protects organic materials that would vanish on land. Their survival was a matter of chance, but their discovery is a testament to our enduring curiosity. This pattern tells us where to look next. The future of rewriting history lies not only in famous ruins, but in the deep oceans, in high mountain passes, and in the subtle chemical signatures left on seemingly mundane objects. Each of these 20 discoveries is a piece of a vast, interconnected puzzle. Together, they prove that the human story is fragile, yes, but it is also incredibly resilient, waiting in countless forms for the right moment to be found and to speak its truth once more. These 20 finds are more than a list. They form a powerful, undeniable pattern of how our story is rewritten. Time and again, it is a physical object that shatters the written record, a statue rising from the sea that proves a city was real, a corroded gear pulled from a shipwreck that reveals technology we never knew existed. The historical narrative we inherit is often written by the victors, focusing on grand empires and powerful kings. Archaeology, in contrast, gives a voice to the silent majority, to the hunter-gatherers at Göbekli Tepe, the everyday citizens of Pompeii, and the egalitarian society of Çatalhöyük. It fills the profound gaps in our story with objects that speak louder than any chronicle. And where do we find these revolutionary objects? Rarely in the centers of power we already know. They emerge from the forgotten margins, from underwater cities like Thonis-Heracleion, from remote caves like Denisovan, and from fields like Sutton, places once considered peripheral to the main events of history. This is where the old stories were preserved precisely because they were overlooked, untouched by the recycling of materials and the destruction that consumed the great capitals. The pace of these revelations is accelerating, not because we are digging faster, but because we are seeing more clearly. Scientific technologies act as a new kind of lens. DNA analysis can extract a whole human species from a sliver of bone. Satellite imagery can spot a buried city from space. Chemical analysis of residues in a clay pot can tell us what a family ate for dinner 3,000 years ago. We are no longer just reading the labels on the jars of history, we are tasting what was inside them. This collective evidence paints a picture of human history that is far richer and more complex than a simple upward climb. It is a story of brilliant peaks and devastating valleys, of interconnected cultures like the Lavau princes' Celtic Europe, and of knowledge lost for millennia, like that embedded in the Antikythera Mechanism. Our past is not a straight line, but a sprawling, branching network of experiments in how to live. So what allowed these specific clues to survive the relentless erosion of time? In almost every case, it was a perfect storm of preservation. A sudden cataclysm, like the volcanic ash at Pompeii, freezes a moment. An arid climate, like that surrounding the Dead Sea Scrolls, prevents decay. A waterlogged, oxygen-free environment, like the seabed holding Thonis-Heracleion, protects organic materials that would vanish on land. Their survival was a matter of chance, but their discovery is a testament to our enduring curiosity. This pattern tells us where to look next. The future of rewriting history lies not only in famous ruins, but in the deep oceans, in high mountain passes, and in the subtle chemical signatures left on seemingly mundane objects. Each of these 20 discoveries is a piece of a vast, interconnected puzzle. Together, they prove that the human story is fragile, yes, but it is also incredibly resilient, waiting in countless forms for the right moment to be found and to speak its truth once more. I would love to hear which of these discoveries reshaped your view of the past the most. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and for more journeys into history's greatest mysteries, be sure to subscribe.